Welcome to Roundtable Tech. I'm your host today. I am Earl. I'm going to be building us a new workstation computer. This is going to be a Ryzen 5. It's a 3600. We are going to be running this as a basic workstation. We're not doing anything fancy, no hardcore gaming, no custom liquid cooling, nothing like that. This is just a standard workstation to be used on a day-to-day basis. In our system for our case, we're using a Cougar. This is the MX330. Not a particularly fancy case. It is a gaming case. However, the reason we chose it is because it's got pretty good airflow, and we've got a panel that we can see in. It's not glass, it is plexiglass, but at least you can see in. So we are going to be doing the ASRock B550 Extreme 4 motherboard today, and we're going to be rocking a Corsair 450 power supply. Normally I'd like to go with a more robust power supply, something in the 550 range and above. However, two factors. First of all, this is not going to be doing a lot. We're not doing any heavy gaming or anything heavy power intensive. And two, due to what's going on a global level with the pandemic, sourcing parts has become very difficult. In fact, just to get these parts here, it's taken several weeks for us to get them in. Moving on beyond the power supply here, we are going to be using a Western Digital. This is a Blue Series NVMe SSD. We have a DVD burner, their standard optic drive, just so that we've got optical media. We are running a little more RAM. We're actually running 32 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz RAM DDR4. And we're also going to be running a GTX 1650 graphics card. All right, all this said here, let's go ahead and get started on our build. Okay, so opening up here, we have our ASRock B550 motherboard. We're going to go ahead and open this and get it out of the box. So, go ahead and pull that out. Oh boy, that's fancy. That's like a briefcase inside of a box. Also, the parts that we're using today, I just want to emphasize that we are not sponsored by any of these companies right now. In the future, if ever you want to sponsor, let us know. Give us a shout out and we'll be happy to lend our ear. All right, here is our B550 ASRock motherboard. Now this is the Extreme 4, so it's a relatively new board on the market. There we go. And let's go ahead and remove our static protection here. Oh wow, this is completely encased in foam. That's interesting. All right. So let's go ahead and remove our motherboard now. So just do that. I'm grabbing the back plate here as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and use our static-free box that's so kindly and generously supplied. Going over the motherboard, looks like we have a USB 3.1 or Type-C connector port. We have our standard USB 3, couple USB 2s. We have some fan headers. Okay, so the kit we're going to be using today for our tools I use quite often on the channel is the iFixit kit. Again, not a sponsor, but I do like their toolkits. They work really well. They basically have everything that you're going to need for doing a laptop, desktop. They just work really well. So let's go ahead and open up our toolkit here. And what I'm going to do is I want to get into our M.2 and we're going to go ahead and get that opened up so we can install our M.2 SSD. So now we have our NVMe drive. We're going to take this. We want to make sure that we line the notch up. So if you look in your connector plate here, you've got a nice little notch to follow. So we just insert it. You're going to insert it until it bottoms out, just like so. Then you should be able to set it down, and then it's going to meet this little guide. It's exactly where we want it. Next, we're going to go ahead and take off our little bit of protective adhesive here, and this is heat transfer silicone, or silicone, I should say, or a type of silicone, I think is what it's called. Anyways, I like to just make sure it sits nice and even. I'll set down one side first, make sure I got a good line up. Then I'll bring it over to the other side. Try to make sure you get that good line up first so it actually does what you want. So now we'll take this Haha! Thank you, magnetism. And then carefully put it back into our hole here, and we're just going to thread that back down. So there's one, and then here's two. Now I do put out this little bit of information for you. Sometimes the NVMe cards don't seat very well, so if you boot up your computer and it says that there's no boot device found, simply take these two screws off, pull it out, put it back in, put your two screws in, try it again. That normally will fix your problem. So the RAM we're using is T-Force. This is the Dark Z memory. Like I said, it's DDR4. This memory here is clocked at 3200 megahertz. And we're going with a bit more because we're going to be using this as a workstation, and I don't want to have any problems with memory. And frankly, memory is kind of cheap at the moment, so that's another reason we went with it. All right, well, this is some nice shiny memory here. Some pretty nice looking RAM. A nice little piece of plastic peel here. We're going to go ahead and pull that off. Oh, gorgeous. All right. So this is made by a company called Team Group. Now, Team Group, they're not the newest on the market, but I do hear a lot of good things about them. And honestly, as far as RAM goes, as long as you find a reputable manufacturer and the reviews about the RAM are good, it's essentially gonna work. You don't have to get high-end name brand. You don't have to buy Samsung or Crucial or Corsair. You can, and they work, and it's great. But if you find a good reputable brand that has a good warranty on it as well, that the reviews show that it's decent RAM, then I have no qualms with using other brands. Okay, so now we've got our RAM installed. Now we're going to go ahead and install our CPU and our CPU cooler. And as I was saying before, the processor we're using, this is AMD's third generation 3600, or I guess technically it's their second generation. Their numbering scheme is a little off to me. It's the 3600 processor, and this is a 6-core and 12-thread unit. So it is going to definitely have enough to do some gaming in the future if we ever decided we wanted to go that route. But for what we're doing, like I said, this is just going to be a workstation, and it should be just fine. There you are. And you want to be very careful taking that out. These pins are incredibly fragile. I usually like to give it a quick overlook, make sure nothing's bent, and no pins that are visibly missing. So we're looking good. So next we're going to go ahead, lift our little arm, and then we want to place our arrows together. So we can see that we have a little tiny arrow, and it's going to match our arrow here. So these are the two arrows we want to meet. And then when we put the processor in, we're just going to lay it in nice and easy, and it should just about fall in by itself. Once it's lined up with all of our pins, I like to give a little wiggle. It's already set, and then we take our lever, we push it down, and that's it. Okay, now that we've got the processor put into the system, the next thing we're going to do is put the CPU cooler on here. Now, like I said before, we're not doing anything fancy. We're going to go ahead and use the stock Wraith cooler that came with the CPU from AMD. Now, there's nothing wrong with these. They actually work quite well. Normally, I would use something like a Noctua or maybe an all-in-one liquid cooling pump or even a custom-built loop. However, because this computer is not really going to be super stressed, there's not much need for it. So we're going to go ahead and pull it out. They've already pre-applied some thermal compound for us as well. I'm going to go ahead and replace that. I'm not saying that their stuff is terrible, but I do have my preference, and I really do like the Arctic MX4. Again, not a sponsor, but I've had very good luck with it, and I'm going to go ahead and maintain that. Okay, so you can see here we've gotten the pre-applied thermal compound taken off. This was taken off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. I actually just ripped it in half. Works like a charm every time. So I'm going to go ahead and apply our MX4 thermal compound on here. And also something to keep in mind, you don't need a ton of thermal compound on here. Really, all you're looking for is about the size of a grain of rice. It doesn't have to be a lot. And I usually go just a little bit overboard because of my own personal paranoia, but that's about all you really need. Now, I know there are people out there, they'll tell you need to cover the entire CPU, and there are those that'll smear it all around, and then there are those that want a P-drop size, and then there are those that are just absolutely overzealous and they cover the whole CPU with 1/8 of an inch thick layer. You're not going to kill the CPU that way. The only time you'll ever kill it is if you go too little compound. But for what we're doing here, this should have a nice even spread, and with the pressure, it's going to press against the CPU, and then it's going to make a very thin layer across the entire CPU for optimal thermal transfer so that we can take the heat that's being produced inside of the processor. It's going to come into our slug here, essentially of just aluminum, and then these fins that are attached here, or I shouldn't say they're attached, this is made of one piece, it's forged. This will let more airflow through, which the fan is going to be pushing airflow through, and it's going to pull that heat away, keeping your CPU cool. We're going to go ahead and remove these 4 screws. And these 4 screws, you're not going to really need them again. You can go ahead and hold on to them, put them in a junk drawer or something, because they are handy for other little projects. There are other, there are other uses for the screws other than just to be used in a motherboard. So next, we're going to go ahead and take our CPU cooler here, and then we're going to set it right onto our motherboard. I'm going to go ahead and set this upwards so that it matches just the lettering. That's nothing more than preference at this point. You can honestly put this in either orientation that you want, as long as it matches up. Okay. Okay. Oh. Come on now. All the way. Okay, and now that we've gotten all of the screws started, now I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down in a cross fashion. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down until we snug up. And the nice thing about these particular coolers, they're very difficult to over tighten because these springs on here give us our actual tension. Then we're going to come over here. We're going to do our next one. Now this is the caddy corner piece. So we went from here to the back side. And now I'm going to shoot back over to our front. Tighten this one down here. And then we're going to come over here and do our last screw. And when you're tightening these down, make sure they're nice and snug. You don't have to torque them where you actually break the screw or anything. Just make sure they're nice and snug so they don't go anywhere. Okay, so this is our 4-pin connector for our fan. This is going to go into one of the headers here. We have our fan 2 and CPU fan. Well, obviously this is our CPU fan, so we're going to go ahead and plug it into our CPU slot. So I like to just give it a nice little tuck behind here, and then we're going to plug that in. Now you've got these 2 little lines on here. Those are the guides that you're going to line up with your guide on the motherboard as well. And it should just slip right in and plug right into place. Okay, so now we have our NVMe drive installed. We have our CPU and CPU cooler, and then we've also installed our RAM. So now we're ready to start working on our case. Let's go ahead and get that configured, and we'll install our motherboard into our case. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and take off our side panel of the computer so we get access so we can start working inside. So in this particular case, it's just a standard Phillips head screwdriver. It's also got the little knobbies on here. You can probably take your fingers and just twist it right off as well. But I'm going to go ahead and use my screwdriver today just so it gives me a little more grip and I can do this faster. All right, now that we've got our screws off of here, we're going to go ahead and take off the panel and just set that aside, just somewhere it's not going to get damaged. Being plexiglass and all, I'm not too worried about it, but better safe than sorry. Now this particular unit has what's called a basement, so we're going to have to take off the other panel to get to the basement. So we're going to come over to our other side. Actually, I'll just do it this way here so you can see. We've got 2 thumb screws here. These ones here are usually super easy, so we just take those right off. I like to put a hand on the panel just so that the panel doesn't want to fly off. And then, I guess I don't have to worry about flying off. I can't get it to move. There we go. All right, that should give us access to our basement now. And look at that, we have access to our basement. First thing I like to install on a case is always the power supply. Now the reason I want to put a power supply in first is because once the motherboard's in, that makes routing the cables a little more difficult. Okay, so now that we've got our supply untangled here, we should be able to take this, slide it in very easily, and then go ahead and put this into play. Now we're just going to give that a little bit of a bump here. The wires that we have are just a little bit stiff, and that's okay. So you're just going to have to give it some wiggles to get it to line up. Now there is something causing us to get stopped in here, so I'm going to take a look and see what's going on. Aha! So we're actually catching on part of the riser here, which helps keep the power supply from just sitting directly on flat metal all the time. So if we just push it over a little bit and then reline it up, we should be able to get our power supply in. Just like that. Now, screws were also provided for the power supply with the power supply, so they're what we're going to use today. And they're pretty super simple here. We just take them in, we line up our power supply, and we put in our screws. Now I'm not tightening them down all the way at first, and the reason being is that if I have to wiggle the power supply a little bit just to get a better screw angle, then I will. And we're going to put this one in, and then we'll put this one down here. Okay, so you can see we don't have any visible gaps here, which is perfect. Now we're just going to finish tightening off these screws. You're just going to snug them up just like before. You want them nice and snug. You're not trying to break the screw. You're not trying to strip the screw. You just want it nice and snug so that the power supply doesn't wiggle around and go anywhere. Not that it will, but if you do have a little bit of wiggle in there, I have seen where the fan inside can cause the power supply to vibrate, and that noise is just, well, aggravating. Okay, our power supply is now installed. Now, like I said before, we install the power supply first because it helps us run our other cables. So we've got our 8-pin here. I'm going to run that up here. Now, I have seen a lot of configurations where they run the 8-pin and the 4-pin. However, we're not overclocking the unit. We're not doing anything fancy with it. So we actually don't need the secondary 4-pin because we're not putting that much of a load on the system. So I'm not going to be hooking up all 12 pins. I'm just going to do 8 pins. Okay. Now I like to just kind of see where our power is going to connect on our motherboard. And so we can see once this is inside, it's going to be about here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come in about here, this top notch. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to run my cable up. Let me get the other cables out of our way here. This is where a little more complicated not having a modular power supply, because you got to figure out where all your cables are. But that's all right. And then, because we don't have any extra drives and our video card doesn't require a power connector to it, we're not going to need any other cable except for one SATA. Now this is going to be for optical drive. All right, we're going to run this right into here with this as well, just so that's out of our way. Now these cables here, we know we're not doing anything else with. We do have our 6/8 pin for a graphics card in the future. Again, if I were going to be putting a bigger graphics card in there, I would probably swap this power supply out. But because we're just using a standard GTX 1650, we're not going to worry about that today. So now we have these a nice little bit of a tie together here. We're going to take our not zip tie, but our twist tie that we were using earlier. And then we're just going to go ahead and knot this back up here. And then we're going to take that and we're going to just shove it inside of our basement, keeping things out of the way and clean. And now we've only got 3 cables we have to worry about. This is our 8-pin, this is our 24-pin, which is our primary power, and then a SATA power for our, you guessed it, optical drive. So, let's go ahead and move our manual here. And now we've got everything ran as far as power goes. Let's go ahead and get our USB and our buttons, as well as our other input-output for our front panel. Okay, so we now have our I/O. This is our USB 3 for the front, our blue ports. And then we have our USB 2, which is our black ports up front. And then we have our standard audio here, which is our HD audio, so our headphone and microphone. And then we have our power reset and our LEDs for our hard drive, as well as, well, power. So on our motherboard, we know these are mostly going to fit towards the bottom, but we know that our USB 3 is in the middle and it's below our power. So we're going to take this and we're going to run it into our second slot down here and pull that through and keep that out of the way. Then we know that these are going to be on the bottom because we have our USB, as well as our power and switching, and then our HD audio is on the bottom as well. Now these ones we're going to take here and we're going to feed up through our bottom. So I like to go right here. There we go. I like to go right here and we're going to pull these up, and then we have plenty of cable here to reach all of the other components. So now that our cables are ran rough at the moment, have a rough run there, we're going to go ahead and take the drive sled, put it back into place, mainly so we don't lose it. And then we're going to go ahead and set this back on its side. And then we'll go ahead and install the motherboard. Now something nice about this particular build here is this gives us some nice upgrades in the future as well. This motherboard, we can put 64 gigs or even 128 gigs of memory if we need to in the future. We also have the ability to put a better processor in here and add additional NVMe drives and additional SATA ports. So we can add additional SATA drives such as mechanical hard drives or even SATA SSDs. Now that we got our cables kind of rough run in here, we're going to go ahead and take our cables and get them out of the way the best that we can here, because when we put the motherboard in, we want to have as much room as we can have. And you know, looking at this, I think we have to rerun a couple of those cables. For sure there, E. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so because of the size of the motherboard in this particular case, we are going to have to rerun a couple of our cables, but it shouldn't be a problem. What we're going to do is we're going to simply pull out our cables from here, and then we're going to move them forward. They're actually going to go right into here. There we are. There we are. Then we'll get our 24 pin in here. There we go. And then this one should be all right. These are going to have to be moved, or this will have to be moved. All right. So with that said, that should have given us a little more room now. I'm going to just kind of push these cables again aside so that they're not in our way. that up here. We're going to take these. I'm actually going to stuff these back out of the way just because they're kind of unruly, honestly. They're not wanting to play nicely. Okay, so now let's go ahead and grab a motherboard and let's try another dry fit here and see how we go. Now we are having some issues here. Just due to space limitations. I think we're going to actually have to pull those cables out all the way, at least for now. It should be pretty simple to put them back in just a minute. There we are. And there we go. Okay, so we've got those cables completely removed. We're going to put that back up top here. And hopefully that gives us our needed room to put our motherboard in. We may actually have to remove the fan even. In fact, it's not a might anymore. It's we're going to remove the fan. All right. Simple enough. Fan's held in by 4 screws. They're just standard Phillips head screws. The thing is, these are very rough threaded, so that they can grab onto that plastic very easily. So they're not that fine machine thread, but they're a real thick coarse thread. So you can't really get those confused. Don't try to shove that in for a screw with a motherboard or anything like that. It won't work anyways. And then we're going to go ahead and take the fan out altogether, and that should give us the additional room that we need to install that motherboard without having any problems. All right, let's try this yet again. So now we're going to take our motherboard. Oh man, that goes in just beautifully now. Look at that nonsense. Now we do have a couple of issues here. We are going to need additional standoffs. So we're here. So we're going to need a standoff here, standoff here, here, and here. Okay. So we're going to need 4 standoffs. So I want to do our outer standoffs first, because sometimes when the manufacturer gives you these extra standoffs, they don't always give you enough of them. So I always like to make sure I get my corners covered and next to the power supply covered, because you're always putting a lot of pressure when you're either plugging in or unplugging that power supply to that 24 pin. So we want to make sure that you have nice and sturdy as possible motherboard experience there. Or not motherboard experience, but as stiff motherboard as possible to prevent problems such as the board breaking. Okay, now we are missing one standoff I'd really like to have as well, which would be for here. However, in our pack we don't have any extras. I might have one extra though in my personal bin, so let me go take a look at that. Okay, and we're back. I had to go down and find a secret stash. I did find another offset. This one's not brass, it's actually coated and painted, which is fine. Now, one thing that you need to make sure that you do is make sure that the screws that you're using for the rest of your standoffs is the exact same screw that will work in the other standoff, so that you're not having to swap around screws, and this one fits just perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and install this standoff now. Go ahead and put that in our screwdriver here, and then we'll screw it into place. And, you know, try not to cross thread it. So let's come on in and let's set us into place. And now all of our holes should have a place for a screw, and they do. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get our Phillips head screwdriver attachment back on here. And then with this particular one, these are the very fine machine thread here. These are the same ones that are used in a lot of solid state drives and 2.5 inch drives. And I usually, for myself, like to start right in the dead middle of the board. And then I'll put my first screw in, snug it up, And then we grab our next screw and we're going to continue our way around. So I usually like to go in kind of a clock pattern. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and take our first cable. This is our 8-pin power cable, and we're going to go ahead and plug that in. And on this particular board, it's actually pretty simple. It's straightforward. I'm just going to set it right here into the socket and plug her straight down. Okay, well, I lied to you. I said it was nice and simple. Apparently, I lied to you. I lied to myself. There we go. Aha! So that's in there, nice and easy. And like I said, there is the additional 4 pins, but we're not using those today. There's no need for this. We're not planning on overclocking or anything like that. Then we're going to go ahead and reinsert our 24-pin power supply here. Once we get our cables right. Here we go. And then we'll bring in our USB 3 connector, which will be down here. Perfect. And then we'll bring our SATA cable up here for the ride. And I'm just going to let that ride there for just a moment because I want to get the other cables in and plugged in first. Okay, so now we've got our 24 pin. We're just going to go ahead and get that plugged in nice and neat here. When I say nice and neat, I mean painfully and excruciatingly long. Ouch! Alright, we're going to plug in our USB 3 here for our front I/O. And if you're wondering what I/O means or stands for, it stands for input output. Just so we can keep the look in here as neat as we can, we're going to pull out our excess cable. There we go. And that's going to hopefully run right down this little channel. And I think it's going to. I think it's going to be beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. All right, so pull those out and around. And that one too, okay? And then we're going to put these in here. Actually, can I make that fit? Let's see if we can make that fit. That would look really nice if we could. You know, if I would have done that beforehand, I probably could have. But for what we're doing, this will be just fine. And these two will come over here. Go. Okay, now we're going to tip this back on its side again. Okay, we're going to go ahead and plug in our audio port first. Make sure you line up. You've got the pin block off there that essentially lines it up so that you don't accidentally plug it into the wrong peripheral in here. Which back years ago used to be super easy to plug in the wrong peripheral. In fact, I remember one of my earlier computers I built, the case it came with, ouch, the USB headers were not all assembled in this nice neat block. They were actually all individual pins, and you had to align each pin. Boy, that took me forever to make work. There we go. And now we have our power switch, our reset switch, power LED, and hard drive LED. Or I guess we're going to call it storage LED. All right, I'm going to sit down here and try to get a little better view. All right, so it looks like we have power top on there. So we're going to do our bottoms first. So it looks like we've got our... Okay. Okay, so on this particular motherboard, our hard drive LED is going to go on our far side down here. I know you guys can't see super well what's going in here because I got fat fingers. Hopefully for our videos in the future it'll be a little better for you. And then we're going to do a reset, which is our next bottom one here. There we go. Okay, then we have our power LEDs, which we've got to put them in individually. I'm going to split that line a little bit. There we go. There's our positive, so that's going to go on our far side here. Ugh, I can't even see. Just shove my head in here a little further and block out more light. That'll make things better, right? I don't think many of you are agreeing with that comment. Maybe I've got a headlamp. Maybe that's what I should do. Be fashionable even. Okay. Then our power switch. Ouch. There we are. So now you can see our cables are much cleaner and neater and tucked in nice and out of the way. Okay. Now it's time to go ahead and install our optical drive. The moment some of you have been waiting for. Not many of you, but some of you. Okay, maybe none of you. In fact, you're probably asking me why in the world am I installing an optical drive in here in the first place? And the simple answer is there are still some pieces of software, albeit old ones, that require optical media. So we're going to keep this installed just in case we need it. So our optical drive here also uses those same very fine threaded screws. So we're going to go ahead and get them put in here. I just don't want this thing moving around. I want it to stay in its happy home. There we are. All right, folks, look at that. Okay, so now we're going to take this, we're going to plug in our power right here on our SATA. Nice and easy. Plugs right in, nice and snug. Now I've got one extra cable in here for power. I'm just going to kind of line this up here on the back, and this is going to let us have that in case we need it in the future. And it makes it cable management in the future a little easier as well. Now we're going to get the SATA cable. All right. All right, so our SATA cable is going to run through here. All right, so now up top here, we're going to take our cable, come in, plug it in like that. And it's just going to go right up into there, nice and neatly. And then on our back side here, we're going to come back over, and here is our SATA cable that we just ran. I'm going to kind of get that out of the way. We want to come down to where our SATA ports are, which should be here towards the bottom of the board. We push through our hole, and here we are. So I'm going to come into our bottom right-hand port, or I guess left-hand, depending on how you're looking at it. There we are. And give that a nice little kind of a pull back. Now I'm not going to go super tight with this because when you have a real sharp turn corner, it can cause some data reading problems, and we just don't want to have that. So we're going to leave that alone. And I'm going to tuck that right back up in there. That way it's out of our way. We're essentially just trying to maximize our airflow. Now you're looking at this and you're probably saying, where's your exhaust fan? Well, it's right here. It's time to put this back on. So a nifty little trick, if you're ever trying to figure out which way the fan is blowing, if you look on the fan, generally somewhere on there will be a little marking. In this case here, we've got an arrow that's pointing to the back. That means that it's blowing air that way. Most of the time where you've got the actual brackets holding the motor in place is where the air is going to be exiting anyways, but it's always a good practice to go ahead and take a look at that arrow to see which way the air is flowing. Yep, that should work fine. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our fan. Let's go ahead and take our screws that we used previously, or we took out of it, I should say. And something for a lot of people, if you've noticed that your fan is running noisily and you're hearing that brrr all the time with the fans, it's a very simple upgrade to go ahead and replace that fan and put a nice quiet bearing fan in there. Noctua makes an amazing silent fan. I really have had good luck with those. They also make very good coolers for your processors as well. And like I said, they're very quiet and they're very effective. So we've almost got this put back together here. Nice and snug there. Now our final screw for our fan. All right. And there we go. And there we go. Perfect. So we've got that fan reinstalled, and now I'm just going to take this cable, run it nice and clean along there, and I'm going to go ahead and plug our fan into our fan header onto the motherboard here, which looks like we're going to have a little excess cable, which is all right. I like to just kind of take that and I'll just pull it over here and just kind of slide it in between, and that's going to help just kind of hold that cable out of the way, because there's not necessarily enough that I need to have a tie holding this in place, but there is just enough that I want to have something holding it out of the way. All right, so we're moving along very well. We've got our fan reinstalled, we've got our motherboard installed, and our optical drive installed. Now we're going to go ahead and install our graphics card. Now, like I said before, we're not going with anything super fancy. We're actually going with a GTX 1650 graphics card. This particular one is made by a company called Zotac. Now, they're not the most expensive kit on the block, but again, for what we're doing with this computer, this should be plenty of horsepower for what we're doing. And if we ever want to upgrade in the future, a quick swap of the graphics card and probably a new power supply, honestly, then we could run a much more beefy graphics card and do what we need to. Now, if we look and we try to plug this in, it's not going to work. We actually need 2 ports here. So we're going to go ahead and remove these 2 slots here. So if we look on the back, we can see this one and this one. These are the 2 that need to go. So we're going to go ahead and give that a nice little kind of a bend. And this is going to help us get this out of the way. Bent a little prematurely there, but that's okay. There's another one and another one. Look at that. Okay. I can straighten that out a little bit here and just show you. That's all that is. Just a very flimsy little piece of metal. It's there to look nice. And we're going to go to the next one. Give it a little bend. I like to bend that backwards, and that gives you kind of a little handle to work with. 2. And that's it. So now we should be able to take our graphics card and install it inside. Looks like it's going to go. So now we need to remove our case covering, and this is going to vary from case to case. Some cases have this. It's real popular with a lot of OEMs, such as Dell and HP, to use these. A lot of times they just want you to put your own screws in, which is fine too. I'm starting to... there we go. Didn't want to come out of there. Okay, so now that that's taken care of, we should be able to come in. We should have plenty of room now. Oh, let's push our little lever down, make sure that it's out of our way too. And now we're lined up, so we're simply going to take this, we're going to press it into place. We should get a nice little click when we're done. There we are. So that's now seated in place. Our lock is engaged, holding our graphics card. And now it's time to put this back on. So we're going to take this. It's going to slide back into our little clip here. It might slide back into our little clip here. There we go. There we go. Now that is going to hold our graphics card in place, keep it from bouncing around too much. And for a little bit of extra security, I'm going to add some screws as well. Now these are the thicker threaded type of screws. These are not such coarse or thin threads. These are a little more coarse. I'm just going to take it inside and I'm going to go ahead and line it up. And the reason I like to do this is even though this motherboard is designed with a extra strength bracket on there, and it should be able to hold up over time better, I don't like keeping things to chance. So it's totally great for me to have a little bit of extra insurance to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. So I'm going to put a second one in here because this is a 2-slot one. And again, you don't have to do this, especially for a graphics card like this. It's a pretty light one. It doesn't have to have this by any means. But if you were going to run a larger graphics card, say something like a 2070 or bigger, or maybe some type of an NVIDIA Quadro card, you would definitely want to make sure you use those mounting points so that it takes the weight of the card. So now this is part of the computer and not so much as part of the motherboard. All right then, so we've got that attached now and we're ready to move forward. We should, aha, here we are. Oh, ha, I zipped it up. So that we can be nice and clean, you can see they've actually already removed one. That's generally designed for a PCI Express 1 slot, and more likely than not, that'd be something for Wi-Fi. But in this case, this particular motherboard doesn't have Wi-Fi built in from factory, which is fine. Most don't. All right, so that's gonna go right like so. Oops. There we go. Go right like that. I'm going to get one of my screws here, just as before, one of our thicker threaded ones. I'm just going to take it in, I'm going to put it in. I'm going to go ahead and screw that into place. And I like to just kind of adjust that by hand, just for looks. All this is doing is helping keep some of the dust out and control some of the flow of air in the system. There we go. And that looks pretty nice. All right, so our computer is built up here. Now we're going to go ahead and install Windows on this particular machine and get it deployed and working. For what we're doing next is just installing the OS, and if you want to learn more about installing an operating system, please go ahead and check up there, somewhere. You'll find a link to go ahead and see how to install an operating system, regardless if you're wanting to install Windows or if you're wanting to install Linux. If you'd like the video, please hit that like button. If you didn't like the video, please let us know. Hit the dislike button. And either way, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and give us some ideas. What would you like to see in the future? So this has been Earl with Roundtable Tech. I'd like to thank you very much for viewing, and you all have a wonderful day.